And welcome back to the Ultra Running Guys. You got Jeremy Reynolds and Jeff Winchester of the Ultra Running Guys. And the reason that we're here is to help you take your next step in your ultra running journey. And these episodes are so fun for us. This is a race spotlight series. And so part of figuring out what your next step is, of course, is what races do you run to do that? And so this really is about highlighting some great races that we think you want to consider for your calendar. And I am stoked. If you've been with us for a while, you know that I grew up in Southern California. This race comes to you from Southern California. Is a beautiful part of the country. Hard to beat the weather. You can probably beat the traffic, but out there, it's hard to beat the weather and the beauty. And so, Jeff, why don't you give us a little background on the race, and then we'll bring on the race director.
I don't feel like I can do it justice since you love the area so much more, and I've never really been there. But this week we are focusing on Leona Divide 100K, and this race is held in Lake Hughes, California, which is north of Los Angeles. And runners are going to spend a majority of this race on the Pacific Crest Trail. Runners are going to have 17 hours to complete the 100K. And if you want to make it your Western States Qualifier, you've got to get it done in 16 hours. One thing that we did notice, though, when we did a little bit of research is that this 100K tops out around 10,000 feet of elevation gain.
Just under.
A little under, but it seems to be a lot in the world that we live in since we're on the flat East Coast. But so yeah, we're going to talk about that as we get going in here, but I'm looking forward to learning more about the race as well. And without further ado, we're going to talk to the race director, Keira Henninger. Keira, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Yay.
So like I said, Angeles Crest 100, that part of the world, I've looked at, done a lot of research. And so when Jeff brought this race up, started talking about where it was, I was like, oh, this is so exciting. It's gonna be great for runners. As we mentioned, we've done some different races, East Coast. We recently just did Rocky Raccoon in Texas, but this is the first one that we've really focused on out west. And it's also the first one with some pretty decent elevation gain. So there's a lot of questions that we have for people that are gonna be considering. But first, I really want to know, because I always enjoy kind of the personal aspect. So before we get into the logistics, what is your favorite thing about the Leona Divide 100K?
Oh, that's a really good question. So one of the best things about the Leona Divide 100K, I think, is that it is ran almost entirely on the Pacific Crest Trail. It doesn't mean there's not a truck trail section, but that's really special because what a lot of people might not know is that it is extremely hard. Actually, it's almost next to impossible to get permits for any race on the Pacific Crest Trail now moving forward. So Leona Divide has been grandfathered in, and any races that are on the Pacific Crest Trail currently, that's kind of the situation that would have to be, but to get any new races permitted. So the 100K, we just moved the race back. Where it is right now is where the original course was for 25 years. There was a huge fire in 2013, and we had to move it like to the other side of the mountain on the other side of the Pacific Crest Trail. And now we got to finally come back. So to me, that's kind of one of the coolest things about the 100K. There's not very many races where you're going to run 100K almost entirely on the PCT. So yeah.
Love it. That's so cool. And it's so pretty out there. It really is.
It really is. It's like a different kind of pretty. It's, it's not like the Angeles Crest Mountains necessarily, so to speak, even though it's in the Angeles National Forest. It's sneaky hard, but it's beautiful. The views are unreal. Yeah, for sure.
And you guys, and we'll link it, but there's a great video out there that shows just some of the running. We really enjoyed watching that. You learn it's only a couple minutes long, but it gives you some of the visuals of the types of things that people would be running. But we know there's history. So you just mentioned it's been around for quite a while, moved it back to the original site. How long has it been around, and kind of tell us the origin story?
So it's been around for 30 years. And originally, the original race director, which is so cool, she was this tiny little lady, and her name was Glenda Kimmerly. And her husband and a whole group of friends, they were sort of the pioneers in the sport. used to run the Leona Divide 50-mile course as a training run for Angeles Crest the first few years, Western States. And it was just a training run. And then Glenda's husband, Bob, passed away from cancer. So they wanted to do it as like in memory of him. They were like, we always, for years did this 50-mile run as a training run together. Let's make it a race. And so for many years, the early history of Leona, a lot of people don't know, like Leona Divide had a Montrail shoe named after it.
Really?
Like there's some really cool ultra running history with Leona Divide. And in 2007, I got into the sport in 2005. And then in 2007, I volunteered at Leona. And in 2008, I sort of took over the role as the volunteer coordinator and instantly found my passion. And then in 2009, Glenda, I believe she was like in her very early 60s at that time, just said, I want to give you this race. I see that you have so much passion and love for it. And I want it to continue. And I think you can make it better than we ever have. And she just gave it to me. Wow. And it was the coolest thing ever. So that's the history of all of the Leona Divide. Yeah.
So good.
That was great. I want to meet this person. So let's move over to the runners a little bit themselves. Why do you believe every runner should run the Leona Divide to be a part of that race?
Oh, that's like such a deep question for me. Leona is like the love of my life besides my husband. It started my ultra running race directing career. It's my baby. It's beautiful. But Leona is, and I really mean this sincerely, it's of all, because I have a ton of races. We have a ton of big races that we organize and put on. But Leona's the one race where everyone in our community either comes out to run, race, crew, or pace. There's a ton of like crew access and it's easily accessible for the most part. So it's like this really grassroots community event, but it's also big, 500-600 runners. So it's a large race and it's like this big community. And everyone sort of comes out. So you really get that vibe and that love and that feel when you race that race. And a lot of people have told me that. So I think that that's what makes Leona special, because there's a ton of beautiful trail races out there. Let's not lie, but it's hard to find that genuine like family feel. And Leona definitely has that. Yeah.
So you got a mix of beautiful trail, some elevation, and then a good community, it sounds like, and some pretty cool history. And I actually really like the fact, I was not aware of that there's only a few, or that it's tough to get on to the PCT going forward. So
so if you want to run a race out there, if you want to run on that as a race, you need to run one of the existing races.
Right. All right. Yeah. So we've talked about some of the good things, obviously, for us. So we're out on the coast. It's flat. We mentioned the elevation gain. To me, it sounds like a giant mountain. But what do you think runners underestimate about the Leona Divide? Like, is there a theme that you see as the race director that you're like, if I could just get runners to recognize this, we'd have some of them be better off?
Oh, that's a good question. The heat. And the reason why I say the heat, it's not like we've had days where it's been 100 degrees, but we've had days where it's been 55 and sleeting, a little bit of snow. So most times it's warm, but when I say warm, it'll say the high is 78 or the high is 79, but it's a different type of heat out there. The sun is really hot and it's the high desert. So, most of it's like between like 4,000, 5,000 feet. But the sun is just really hot and there's a lot of exposed sections. So feel it a little different. And I also think the time of year that it happens, people aren't quite ready for that kind of heat. And pretty quickly here in SoCal, it gets hot. So it's like, we do have cold, January, February. I know it's not real cold, but it does get cold and it does snow actually out on the Leona course every year, January, February. But then it's like overnight, it gets hot. And I think that everyone kind of everywhere is not prepared for that heat. And then on race day, Leona is just a little extra because of the exposure and the sun is a little hot. So that's what I just always tell people. If you can do a few, training runs in the sun, a couple sauna sessions, it will help. So that's definitely something that is one of the harder things about Leona.
It's interesting because when you look at the race, it does start in April. I mean, the race is this upcoming year is April 20th, 2024.
Yep.
And it would be the early spring or the middle of spring, I guess you'd say. And so most people have not heat acclimated at that point. Even us, we live on the southeastern side of the US. We are just now starting to ramp up our temperatures. And any races that we're doing that are hot, we begin to feel early and often. But once we get into the summertime, we're all cooking. But yeah. And so it's at the time of the year, most runners have not heat acclimated at all, regardless of where they're training. So that's a really good point. I didn't think about that. Because we thought when we were looking at this, we thought the weather's probably mild, mid 70s, whatever. It's probably really pleasant.
Well, in Southern California, not that we get a lot of rain, but March does tend to be kind of like our rainy month. I mean, minus this year, I think it rained every day this winter. But normally in March, it is just a little rainy and a little cloudy, and it's like always in the like low 60s, and then all of a sudden and we have Leona every year, the third Saturday in April. It's like our religious date that and it's like, it never fails. It's like, it just a week or two before the race, the SoCal temps come out and it's like, okay, sunshine's here, we're ready. And people just aren't prepared. So it's interesting. Yeah. No matter how much I tell people, like, it's going to be hot. Yeah.
So if you're listening, take that note. If you want to get out there, just, be prepared for the surprise. It's warm now. All right. So this is kind of related to that. So we talked about that because we had a question, but it sounds like we've answered it, is what can runners do to prepare themselves to avoid a DNF? So I think it's really just plan for the heat, be prepared. But if somebody's going to drop from your race, because even in that video, you talked about a certain section, it sounds like there's probably some difficult parts, but we've also learned that the structure of a race, whether it's a looped course, different things can really set up a runner for an opportunity that, like, if they were going to DNF, this is probably the spot. And sometimes it's good for people to know that so they can plan on how to get out of that, right? So if someone was going to drop from your race, one, what is it going to knock them out? It sounds like it's probably the heat, but is there a certain spot or aid station or something you would tell people you just got to get through that?
Oh, that's a good question. So I have purposely designed a lot of my race courses. Like if there's 100K, I almost always have a 50-mile and 50K distance. And I always like to start, for the most part, the distances together. And I make it very convenient, like that the 50-mile distance just turns around an aid station or two earlier, and same with the 50K. So what makes Leona really hard is if you are in the 100K, you pass right by the 50-mile turnaround spot and you're out on the course. If you're having a tough day and it's just right there, all you got to do is just turn around and go back and not keep going, the totally like super hard section that follows that. So I think that that's also the harder thing about Leona. And I would even say my other race, Sean O'Brien, because I do the same thing. But I also, like, it breaks my heart when people get DNFs. And I love that I give that option. And if the races start together. So it's like no harm, no foul. You get a finish. You did the 50-mile, you're not getting 100K DNF. But it makes it really hard mentally. I mean, half the field will just turn around at the 50-mile turnaround or turn around at the 50K turnaround. They're like, yeah, I got a 50K in. But it's a mental, it's hard. So that is definitely a tough thing about Leona Divide. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that since you have the option to get a 50K or 50-mile medal or whatever the finisher medal is, that when they get to that spot, that is the reason that they're going to more likely not drop, but at least drop down in distance.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So it does turn out that we don't have a ton of DNFs. They'll just drop down a distance. So, and I've definitely catered to that. Like I said, I just have such a soft spot for people for DNF, and I try to make it so that they have an option. But when they have to make that choice, a lot of people just turn around.
Well, let's talk about that for just a second, because it's my understanding, I believe it's called the Sawmill Truck Trail at this point is the hard part. And so is that the section that they know they're about to go up? Can you describe that section that makes it so challenging?
Yes. So as you are on the course and you leave that 50-mile turnaround spot, and then from there, you're on the 100K course. It's 100K only. And you leave the PCT and you go like almost 6 miles all the way down the Sawmill Truck Trail. And it's nothing but down. You're like way up high up a Maxwell Crossing Road, which is one of the highest points on the course. And you go down couple, I mean, it's a pretty good drop. And then the aid station's at the bottom, and then you have to turn around and go all the way back up. And that is the only fire road section, and it's fully exposed. So people are hitting it in the warmest part of the day, late afternoon, like, between like 3:30 and 5:30 p.m. It's just tough. Like, it was brutal for people last year. Yeah. And it's easy access there. And like the runners know that. So they just, a lot of them, when they got to the bottom, they called it quits. They're like, I am not going back up that. Yeah. So
what's the gain of that ascent back up?
Oh, I'd have to double check, but I think it's around like 2,600. It's a lot, 2,400. And it's just really exposed. So remember, with that Leona Divide sun. Now I will say, and I'm not just saying this, it's beautiful. Like when we were out course marking, we went from the turnaround point to point, and like we started up that truck trail, right after sunrise. And oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. But I don't think very many runners felt that way on race day.
40 miles in at 2 p.m. You're like, yeah.
Well, it's a 10K, so it's 6 miles to go back from the bottom back to the top, and it's 2,400 feet of elevation gain. You're talking 400 feet of elevation per mile.
Yeah,
that's a climb.
Estimates, but that's about what it is. It's just tough, so tough.
I love it.
Yeah, we were fresh and we were marking it, and I was like, oh, this is a tough climb. And Amanda's like, it is. She's like, where does trail marking? And I was like, oh no.
But if you're listening, so here, because I'm thinking, okay, we got people listening there in two camps.
Mm-hmm.
One is, hey, I want to try. Maybe I'm thinking about my first ultra. I'm not quite sure how I can do, right? And so it sounds like this is a perfect opportunity to line up, see what you can do, because at the end of the day, you can turn around with the 50K group, you can turn around with the 50-mile group, and then you can go for the 100K, but first time out, you can kind of see. But then there's the other camp that I would think that's like, okay, I'm going to go after this thing and use it as my qualifier. So it's kind of like, do or die. I want to finish this thing because that's what I should have to do. And that's where I think that's really valuable, just to know that, hey, there's going to be this section. It's going to be hard. But I imagine once you get back up that climb, it's probably home free from there. Is that right? Or is there any other surprises?
Oh no, there's other surprises.
Yeah. So what I was about to say is it's not home free, but no. Just be prepared for a tough race. But I think that's so good, because for people to understand, I actually really like, especially for the newer runners, the option to kind of go, let's see how it goes, and not feel, to your point, like it's pass fail. Right.
Yeah, but I think for the runners who finish it for that climb and those challenges at the end of the race to be there, I think when you finish the 100K, you probably have a huge sense of accomplishment, because you're like, I went through a lot and then I had to really grind it out at the end.
Well, and for perspective, there's only a handful of Western States qualifiers that are not 100-milers, and this happens to be one.
That's correct, right? And that's why.
So, yeah. And you mentioned Sean O'Brien, and that is as well, right? In fact, that's a gold ticket race.
Yes. And I will humbly say that I think that the Sean O'Brien 100K is so much harder than, not, I shouldn't say so much harder. I have so much respect for anyone that finished it, but it's significantly harder than the Leona Divide 100K, in my humble opinion. There's quite a lot more climbing, and the climbs are steeper, and it's just tough. The one thing I will say is I don't necessarily think that Leona is very technical. You have a lot of very smooth butter PCT, like single track that goes for, and lots of downhill. So this course is either up or down for the most part. And the downhills are the most smooth sections of Pacific Crest Trail single track. Like you might kick a rock. And so that's where, where there's parts of Sean O'Brien that are, not mountain treacherous technical, but a little more technical and just a little different. So yeah, Leona, it definitely has that factor that it's not very technical.
Right.
Yeah, like Jeremy said earlier, we watched the video of the Leona Divide that's available on your website as well. And the trails, we kept talking about the fact, look how smooth they are. Like
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. Oh, you guys must have been laughing compared to like the trails. I mean, I can't even imagine. Like, yeah.
Well, we have our roots and rocks
Yeah.
and
So
dumb stuff.
again, we're flat. We're not in mountains. We run like mountain bike trails,
Right.
But they,
They don't
so
have
we don't
that.
have the views, that's for sure. We got views of pine trees, but
I like pine trees.
I mean, I do too.
Okay.
You just,
Oh, yeah.
I get to see the pine trees 6 feet in front of me, not,
Let's talk
miles.
aid.
Yeah. All right. So aid stations. You mentioned that there is some easy access, but talk us through the aid station if somebody's preparing. How many, how far apart, what type of stuff do you offer? Let's go through that.
Okay. So I pride myself on my aid stations, and I really think that that is one of the most important things to offer runners that, pay their hard-earned money for a race entry. So we offer a massive variety of food, and I am in the SoCal community known for my aid stations. So
Nice.
yeah, so we have every kind of sweet and salty snack that you could imagine, and we go like above and beyond. I do gluten-free bread options. We do almond butter instead of just peanut butter sandwiches. And the list goes on and on. Lots of fresh fruit, tons of ice. And we don't just do like cut up oranges. I always like to do watermelon, strawberries, bananas, and oranges. So we do a variety, lots of options, very well supported. And the community down here, obviously SoCal is very populated. And from that, and like you were joking earlier about the traffic and all the things, yes. But from that comes one incredibly large ultra and trail running community, and everybody wants to volunteer. We have this really amazing family down here. And so every aid station will have a minimum of like 10 volunteers, and they are like, it's like a pit stop. I mean, whatever you need. And when you come in, the drop bags, they're in numbered order. There's a volunteer that gets your drop bag, opens it for you, helps you. So that to me is really important. I think that that's what makes a race. So you'll get that at every aid station. Most of the aid stations are not more than 7 miles apart, but some of those aid stations, you have some pretty good climbs. So we make sure that our race guide and the email, tells people to be very prepared. Like there are sections you don't like, one handheld is, you probably want an extra bottle, stuff like that. But most of the aid stations are about 7 miles apart for the most part, minus that Sawmill truck trail aid station. So that's the longest stretch. That's almost a 10-mile stretch without aid. So,
Okay.
And that would be the absolute longest that you would go.
Can I ask a question of clarification? So I want to go back to what you said about the volunteers help you by getting your drop bags and stuff. Now, is that something that is by design? In other words, so I've run a couple races where I have a drop bag located on a tarp, and I have to go find it and everything like that. Do runners come in and they say, here's my bib, I've got a drop bag. They look for your bib number and the volunteers go and grab it and bring it to you. Is that how that works?
Yes. Yeah. So, and we have before, so I've never handed off the job of volunteer coordinator for all of my races to anyone but me. My volunteers are my family. We have a Facebook group page with 800 people, and it's like insane. So I send those emails and I'm like, we have a drop bag captain. So at the big races, that person's job, that inside of the aid station, along with the captain and co-captain, there's a drop bag captain. And their job is to get the drop bag, open it for the runner. And sometimes they'll have an assistant that is there just to help with drop bags. Because that's so important. A runner's tired and they don't want to have to look for their drop bag and try to find their stuff. And that's what volunteers are there for, in my opinion. And so I feel like the race should represent me and what I would want at a race. And so I just strive for, nothing less but the best at my races. And my volunteers are that way too. Like they take so much pride in their aid stations. And the captains I've had at all these aid stations have been the same for years. I have captains that have been with me for 10 years. Like we're like family. So yeah.
I like that a lot. And I think, that's not commonplace. What the other way that I described is a little bit more common. And so I think that is an extra touch that you're putting in there for runners. And I think I hope like other race directors are listening to it too, because I think it's one of those things that when when you're in that moment, and it is hard to find your drop bag sometimes because and I'm not saying they're not like thrown and not tossed aside on a tarp, they're laid out, but there's so many that it can be overwhelming when you first come up. You're like, okay, what color is my bag? Where's, that kind of thing. And so it's really cool that you do that. I mean, as a runner that does ultras and stuff, I would really like that. I think that would be a nice touch in that moment where I'm like, I don't want to do anything but die, right? So that's really cool. I'm glad you do that for them. I think that's an awesome addition to your volunteer.
Well, I think
we try.
I think the consideration too, and so I've been spoiled, right? Pretty much every race that I've run, my wife and my daughter are my crew, and I come in and they hand me what I need, right? And I always see the people that are self-supported, and I'm always amazed at what they're doing. They have their bags and they come in and do their things, but it's at those moments, right, where I'm like, gosh, like good on them. But I would struggle so much to not have some of that help. So the fact that you have people that take care of that, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, or you typically do self-supported, or you're probably going to be self-supported, I think that's a huge.
Well, yeah. Well, even in races that aren't even self-supported, sometimes your crew can't get to you. Like, so one of the ones I did, my crew could not get to where I was, so I put my drop bag at that spot in 2 different places. And so you have both situations where either you are self-supported or there's not a crew access. And to have that at the drop bag location is really cool. I know we've kind of beat that up a little bit on that, but it's I hear that, and I recognize that it is something that's different than what I am personally used to experiencing. I'm sure other races do it, but it's not common that I've seen. So very cool. Very cool.
Thank you. I think the volunteers too. We have, I'm lucky that I have enough people that we can do that. I know there's places and races that it's more remote and they're small towns. And so I don't want any other race director to like hate on me for,
no.
We just have tons of people and they just, I'm good at delegating and we found a system. So
no. I don't think it's a negative for the other race directors. I think it shows another place that you can plug people in, that you can, if you can get the manpower to do it, this is another touch. And most race directors want to create incredible experiences for their runners, right? And so if a race director is thinking like, what can I do that maybe I haven't thought of yet? This could be an idea that they can incorporate if they've got the manpower to pull off. If they don't, then they need to make do and at least have the drop bags in an organized thing, which they do, and so, but to me, it's a really cool thing.
Thank you. Awesome.
All right. So we've touched on a lot of the details of the race. Let's talk about registration. So registration opens December 1st. We talked about the race is April 20th. What do people need to know about registration? Because some races, you got to be right there. You got to be ready to hit the button. Some require qualifying races or volunteer hours. Talk to the audience and let them know what they need to be prepared for.
Okay. So I have never done a lottery for any of my races, and none of them, because to me, I feel like if you can get up in the morning and click register, it's the easiest way to be super fair and inclusive. That way everyone just has a fair shot. It doesn't, judge gender, nothing. It's just like, if you get up at 5 a.m. on, January 1st and you register, you're in. So Leona is not a lottery for that reason. And it usually sells out in a few days. So it's not something like it sells out in 2 hours, because I am allowed a lot of runners, for trail running standards. But usually like about a week or 2 after opening, we are sold out and the wait list starts filling. So with registering, I always say just, register when it opens. So that's but yeah, no lottery. And we used to always open registration on January 1st, but we've moved it to December 1st this year because we have some new and exciting things going on for Leona Divide. And I just felt like we should open it a little bit early. And the SoCal community gets so antsy. They're like, when's registration opening? I'm like, y'all know when it's going to open, January 1st, but now it's different. So yeah. So really there's not a lot to know about registration. Like there's no lottery. There is a discount code that is the overall KH races code for $15 off. So if anybody, it's just KH races. So if they decide to register, I just want to make sure everyone uses that code. And it's just we send it out. It's all across the board. So
we'll make sure to include that in our show notes.
Yes. If that's awesome. All right with you. Yeah. We'll put it right in there.
Please. Yeah. Yeah.
KH races. And so I think the big takeaway is plan ahead, know if this is a race that you want to run, because even though it may not be instant, if you miss the window, it's going to be, that's probably it. But you mentioned some exciting news. What do you have going for 2024 Leona Divide?
So I'll segue this with saying that pre-pandemic, I had this dream and idea of creating a 100-mile in the Santa Monica Mountains, where I have my Sean O'Brien and Ray Miller course. And I made that dream happen. And we did it for 2 years. Last year was the last year, not for permitting issues, but just the cost of the permit with state parks it ended up costing me a lot of money out of pocket to put on. And it takes a while to build a 100-mile race, but my heart was broken that KH races couldn't continue that, but it just wasn't feasible. I have a lot of staff and a lot of people, and that was very hard for me. And my brain just kept racking, like, how could we have 100-mile? How could we do 100 miles still? Maybe it could be where we already have a race. And then Leona just kept popping in my head. And it was like, Leona's so established. Like, if we added it there, it would be so easy or easier. Like, that would work. And then the fire got ignited. And then, of course, it took me going to the Forest Service, and, they were like, well, you already have an existing race there, so it's not a new race. So it was a little like bobbing and weaving and a few things, but they were like, sure, that's fine with us. So the announcement is we are adding 100-mile to the Leona Divide for 2024. And it's going to be the current 100K course. And then we are also going to use some of the old course that we just left. So it'll use the PCT from our old course that we just used in all the previous years. So it's kind of a combination of both. And it is mostly ran on the Pacific Crest Trail. So it's a 100-mile race that is like 85% on the PCT, which is insane.
That is so cool. Although I was hoping you were just going to say the extra 40 miles were going to be back and forth on the truck trail there,
Just up in the sawmill. No, they're going totally on the other direction on the PCT, and it's so exciting. Yeah.
That's awesome.
That is huge. Congratulations on that. And so to touch on a couple things. So if you're listening, obviously there's a lot of, we're kind of focusing on the 100K, but there's a 50K option. There is a 50-mile. And if you're fast and you're interested in the Angeles Crest, the 50-mile is a sterling silver ticket race.
Yes.
So the top 2 spots there get entry to the Angeles Crest, correct?
That would not be me.
You're right. So for us, we're just out there having a good time.
We're just trying to tell people about it.
And then you've got the 100K option, which is the qualifier. And now the granddaddy of them all, the 100-miler. And is that going to start at the same time, or is that going to be a separate start?
It is going to start at the same time. So we made the little bit of tough decision to take out the 30K. That was the smallest race we had at Leona Divide. So this year, I think I barely had like 45 people sign up for it. And due to the fact that, permits, obviously we are limited. So we pulled the 30K out. And so now so the 55K, 50-mile, 100K, and 100-mile will all start together at 6 a.m. And we are giving the 100-milers 33 hours to finish, which I feel like is pretty generous, only because the elevation gain will be under 17K. So it'll be right around like 16,009, which is a lot. It'll probably have the same amount of loss. My husband just shot it on Gaia. So it's not flat by any means, but it's not something like 23,000. It's not Angeles Crest. So I feel like that's pretty fair. So I'm excited about that too. Our actual cutoff for the 100K is 18 hours. And if you make the last cutoff, we've let people finish after 18 hours. I'm not going to cut someone at the finish. If they make the last aid station, we give them a finish. So we've had people finish longer than 18 hours. So I was like, the aid stations are open. Yes, we would have to extend them till the next day, but it's not that much longer. Let's do it. So I'm excited. Yeah.
That's so
That's
cool.
awesome. So you clarified, because I misspoke in the very beginning of the intro. I said the cutoff for the Leona Divide 100K was 17 hours. And I mentioned that the Western States Qualifier cutoff was 16 hours. Is it still 16 hours for Western States qualifying?
Leona is 16 hours. Sean O'Brien is 17 hours.
Okay.
And gosh, as the race director, I'm trying to remember if John Menninger might have changed that, but for goods purposes, let's say that the Western States cutoff is 16 hours.
Got it. Perfect.
Yeah. But you have actually 18 hours on our clock to finish.
Right. Awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, this is
congratulations, by the way, on that.
Thank you. I'm so excited. Yeah. SoCal is in need of I'll be careful how I say this. SoCal is in need of, minus the San Diego 100. That is a phenomenal 100-mile race, but they're in need of a really good, solid 100-mile race without any controversy around it. Just good, nice people putting it on, and that it's organized and you're going to be taken care of. And because minus San Diego 100, they're really Leona, there isn't, it's a tough situation down here we have in SoCal. So I'm excited to be bringing and giving that opportunity to people. You sign up for 100, they're not cheap. People train so hard, and nobody should have an experience other than, they're taken care of and things like that. So that's the goal for this 100-mile race. A lot of love.
I love it. I love your energy. I love what I've seen of the course. And of course, being from kind of that area and region, it's probably moving towards the top of my list once I put stuff back on the calendar. So I'm a little bit impartial.
So you're saying you're going to run it.
Use KH races to get a discount.
What was that code?
KH
races.
KH races.
No, but I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time again, for just the great energy. This has been so much fun. And now I'm going to talk to the audience for a minute. If this is your first time finding us on YouTube, we have been doing the podcast since 2020. We love this. And like we said in the intro, just really, we're here to help you take your next step. And if you're just part of the ERG family, we appreciate you. We love you guys. And as always, we owe you a ton. But
go run Leona.
Yeah, that's right. Go run Leona. And Keira, just thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thanks, you guys. This was so fun. I was so honored when you reached out to me. I actually don't really do podcasts. Not that but a lot of people might not know. My little tidbit is I'm a total introvert, and I'm a really private person. You kind of have to be once you get to the place I'm at. And so for me, I was so excited. Like when I saw your email, something just said, do it. And I would say probably every other week, like I usually don't do podcasts. I turn them down. So for me, I was like, these guys are so awesome. I just really want to do this. So I'm really honored, and this was awesome.
We appreciate that.
That means a lot.
Yeah.
That really does.
Well, you did great, and we then have rights. So that's great. Awesome.
All right. Well, for everybody, again, we appreciate you, and we'll be talking soon. And Keira, we'll make sure all these notes and links and stuff are down in the show notes. So, but all right. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk soon, and cut.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the content. If you haven't already, don't forget to check out our full lineup of podcast episodes that are designed to help you take your next step in your ultra running journey.
So be sure to check the links below, and you can visit our website at theultrarunningguys.com or download your episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, when in doubt, just show up.
See ya.